Thanks very much, Minister. I'd now like to invite all our panellists up on stage for questions. I will draw Leanna into discussion initially with a fairly simple question, and that's on jobs. And in our business, we see the tourism economy, education, and agribusiness picking up the slack where some of the traditional industries are falling away. Leanna, where do you see private sector jobs growth driving South Australia?
Well, the focus at the moment, I guess, is on the total number of jobs for obvious reasons. We have an unemployment rate over 7%. But I think the important thing is to focus on jobs growth in those industries that will become globally competitive for all the reasons that we've just heard. And I think there's a tension there, of course, because if you're going to improve global competitiveness and productivity, that often means perhaps automation and so forth, and maybe immediate term a decrease in jobs. So I think it's important for us to focus on not just total, but also on where those jobs are growing. I think you've identified some of the sectors. We need to build on our strengths. We clearly have, in the resources sector, the agribusiness area. The key there, I think, is to get the companies focusing more on value-add products where the job growth will occur.
I might ask another question while I get the chance, and especially while the Minister is here, having spoken about the ideas boom. I was just wondering whether one of the things with innovation and in business, it's quite easy to talk about, but very hard to execute, and it often does require a bit of lead time. I'm just wondering whether any of the panellists, from their own experience, and I'll open this to each and all of the panellists, how we might get some advice, how we can, I guess, embed innovation in our business rather than just talk about it.
Well, I mean, certainly banking is one of those areas I think that it's very heavily involved in that side of things, and clearly where a lot of the opportunities are as well. Now, I mentioned some of the opportunities that were emerging from that Asian income story. One of the ones I didn't mention, though, was what it could mean for financial services in Australia. It's really quite interesting to see when we look at things like the number of electronic transactions per person in Asia. It's still extremely low, whereas in most advanced economies it's very high. We do most of our banking activities and payment activities online in some form these days, so there's clearly scope for real growth there, and that will require the technology investment to go with it. So yes, if you put your money on the table, there are opportunities there, and clearly a lot of sectors in Australia are doing exactly that. And any assistance, any encouragement we get in that direction can only help the broader economy.
Perhaps I'll kick in. I think one of the aspects about this aspect about growing innovation in your own company. I come from the biotech sector, and there's never an issue of growing innovation. It's globally focused all the time. An important aspect, I think, that helps that is the connectivity with other entities in the supply chain or around you, because it's you learn from that as well. And I think the more we can grow those clusters of companies, the better. But I think in the long term, I think we do need to change our culture. To be honest, I think we're tad complacent in Australia. Life's been good. We talk to our graduates about what careers they want to go into, and they'll think about being employees. They won't think about starting up their own companies, and the more we can get that mindset changed, I think that's the answer. For example, if you look at there's a survey that's been done of the universities, classifying universities in a scale of how many of their graduates start up companies. So it's not does the university start up the company, it's how many of their graduates do. Not surprisingly, Stanford's at the absolute top. But if you look at all of the universities in Australia put together are only 10% of Stanford. And I think that's saying something about our entrepreneurial culture. There's another survey which ranks the top universities on being innovative, and Australia doesn't rank in the top 100. USA has 50, of course, but I think interestingly and positively, Korea has about 10, and I think that would have happened in a fairly short time frame. So I think we just have to put in place a few changes, and we change that, and we change our innovative graduates, and they're going out there starting up new companies. Then I think that's the solution in the end.
I will open the floor. We have a question up the front.
Hayden Manning from Flinders Politics and Public Policy. On the theme of big ideas and releasing the inner revolutionary, it's more an invitation to Craig than a question. Right at the end, you alluded to, yes, it's been a big week. You've got a background in matters nuclear. What's your general observation on where this state might be heading in what is a huge public debate and ultimately some really big decisions for government? I mean, I guess I'm asking any advice.
Well, I think Admiral Scarce has led the Royal Commission in a fact-finding exercise. It's important to understand as Australia and South Australia explores the potential opportunities for involvement in nuclear life cycle is, you know, what benefits and what economic benefits can be realised from a very mature process in industry that's already been well trodden by international countries and companies. So I think the facts are there to inform that public debate. I think what has been missed is really the part about Australia being a responsible owner. It does produce low-level waste. It does produce small amounts of intermediate-level waste. I think learning to become a responsible nuclear owner and operator and carefully managing our own waste is a very low-risk and sensible way to start. Now, whether that leads to wider economic benefits and handling and storing waste for other international countries is really a matter for those countries and whether their regulations actually allow for that. So I'm not familiar with the assumptions that's been made in the review, but it's a very good start to get the facts out there and have a good informed public consultation process that follows.
Andrew Russell from Oricon Advisory. A question to Minister Pyne. Minister, what modelling has been done to look at the change in our economy based on your innovation and ideas policies, and how would that modelling characterise a new economy in, say, 5 years' time?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of modelling being done all the time by institutions that the government are responsible for, whether it's the Productivity Commission or the Department of the Treasury and Finance, as well as all the independent institutes that operate all around Australia. I'm not familiar with one particular body of evidence that shows that an innovative economy will reap a certain increase in GDP, but I can certainly have one of my office investigate whether that's the case. The government's instinctive motivation around the need to innovate the economy is that we don't need a report from a modelling agency to tell us that Australia's been relying too much on mining, agriculture, tourism, international education, and falling behind other countries in the world. A lot of other countries are like us, of course, but the UK is changing its economy, leading the way. But countries like South Korea, Israel, Singapore, Japan, parts of the United States, Germany, have all been embracing the need to be innovative. It makes a lot of common sense, of course. If we can't compete with some of the Asian and future African economic powerhouses for labour costs, then we have to be better at what we do. It has to be high quality. It has to be things that people want. It has to be changing all the time, because people with low labour costs predictably bang a lot of metal but don't necessarily create high-tech industries. That's our future for advanced manufacturing, and that is working. I mean, I know that South Australia has a 7.2% unemployment rate, and I know that we're often down in the dumps in this state about the latest transformative change in our economy that we sort of assume means the end of our state. But actually, we have a lot of positive things to talk about in South Australia. And I know the media, much as I love the media, and I'm sure there's members of the media here, need to constantly have this sense of crisis that needs to be solved. I mean, there are really tremendous things happening in this state. Leanna's part of the biomedical part of our sector. I think it was Pfizer just paid a tremendous amount of money for one of the companies down in the Theberton biomedical precinct, because they believe that they'll be able to have 200 jobs down there soon and create a pharmaceutical that will be quite transformative. That's just one example. I mean, the Commonwealth Government and the state government are together investing in things like the North-South Corridor, the Northern Connector. I know that for the workers and the people in Holden, of course, in Elizabeth and the northern suburbs, they're very worried about their future. But we're working and talking about how to massively expand the Virginia agriculture region by changing irrigation practices, by using the recycled water from Bolivar, which we can do. I'm not one of these politicians that talks down the South Australian economy all the time. That does benefit people who create issues and can't deliver or solve them. I don't believe that the closure of the car industry, for example, will lead to hundreds of thousands of job losses, because once we discovered that Holden, Ford and Toyota were leaving, the Victorian, South Australian and Commonwealth governments didn't just sit back and say, well, that's bad luck. We actually started creating things like the Automotive Diversification Program, the Next Generation Manufacturing Investment Program, to transition those kinds of businesses to advanced manufacturing. And a lot of businesses are doing that. So I don't think we should give any encouragement to people who talk down our economy. Malcolm is instinctively believing that innovation, creativity, new ideas, disruptive technology is where we can make a big difference to our jobs and growth in this country, because we have a very highly skilled workforce. We have excellent universities. We have 3 very good universities here. I heard what Leanna said about our universities not being very innovative, and that's why, as part of the National Innovation and Science Agenda, we aren't simply going to pay universities to do research from the ARC, the Australian Research Council, or the NHMRC. We're going to reward them if the research that they're doing can be commercialised. We'll still do basic research, of course, but we have to be able to we want them to show that this research could be commercialised, and that will attract the money. And of course, where the money goes is the incentive for universities to change their culture around things like being innovative. I could go on and on about all the exciting things that are going to happen in South Australia, but suffice to say, innovation does work to change our economy, and the businesses in the automotive sector that are innovating will have futures. The businesses that say the government has to give us money and keep us open because we employ 30 people or 100 people or 10 people, they won't exist into the future.
My question is addressed to Craig Lockhart from Eric Neal, retired engineer. As a corollary to an earlier question, with over 400 nuclear power stations in the world operating and a whole lot of nuclear technology developed in many countries, why is there so much sensitivity about nuclear power in South Australia, or anything to do with nuclear activity?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to comment whether why there's so much sensitivity in South Australia, but why is there so much sensitivity around the nuclear industry? It's probably a better question, and having someone that managed one of the strategic deterrent sites and have protesters chain themselves to my gates on a daily basis, I suppose I'm qualified. I think there's a myth that nuclear goes bang, and that's wrong. It doesn't go bang. I think the incidents that we've seen in Chernobyl and Fukushima clearly, because of the worldwide coverage, colour the judgment of individuals about how safe this industry is. Given that it's been highly regulated for the last 50, 60 years, it is one of the safest industries in the world. However, human factors cannot be avoided. In Chernobyl, I think you'll find the reports found that there was a number of safety operations mechanisms and bypasses were ignored by the operating staff, and it resulted in a fire. Fukushima, the nuclear power plant was designed for a 5-metre tsunami withstand. It was designed for a 0.28 G seismic event, but it wasn't designed for a 15-metre tsunami that happened. And I'm not sure any country in the world could have built enough defences to protect that. So I think there's a common misconception that nuclear material is intrinsically unsafe in controlled environments, which it is. It is one of the safest energy production technologies in the world and the lowest carbon emission technology. The issue has always been about what we do with the waste and how we store that waste, and it comes in many forms. The UK is dealing with this problem right now. It has had waste repositories for lots of years, but recognise that those waste repositories and storage sites would be at capacity at the point when its existing power stations would start to come offline and the new power stations were being built. So again, it had to invest in new technologies, waste minimisation, volume reduction, recycling technology to minimise its waste generation capacity and storage needs. So I think this is one of the reasons that now is a good time to have a Royal Commission and get the facts out to the general public and have an open, informed debate. There's a wealth of experience that's been generated over 60 years from nuclear producing countries who could be part of that debate. But it's important to have that debate so we could take some of those myths away.
Jane Rutherford, Coda, South Australia. I'd ask you, Minister, first of all, I'd point out I think our unemployment rate in South Australia is 6.8 at the moment, I think yesterday. But more importantly, I think, Minister, I'd be interested in your views about investment, not just in younger people across the workforce. The workforce in South Australia, 570,000 South Australians are over the age of 50. And indeed, they are very much the workforce of the future. So how do we make sure the whole of the community, your point about needing to embrace risk, perhaps think about work differently, jobs differently, industry differently, and certainly moving across industry is really important. How do we make sure the whole of the community is a part of that? It seems to me part of that perhaps is through some ideas that are getting tossed around here in living laboratories, where consumers are very much part of design and development. But how else might we make sure that the whole of the community changes and embraces that appetite of risk?
Well, I'm not cheering for 6.8 or 7.2 unemployment rates. So I'd like to see the unemployment rate down about sort of 4.5 or 4%, because I think people say that's full employment or even lower. But thank you for pointing it out. Well, I believe that we can do a great deal to encourage older Australians to stay in the workforce. And we are doing that. The previous Labor government started doing that. We're doing that as well. And I think an agile economy that encourages innovation and new ideas, particularly around small and medium enterprises, is a very good way of doing that. Because a lot of the older workers, whether they're over 50 or over 50, 55, 60, 65, etc., many of them would have been involved in industry which had large workforces, large businesses, but the future for them is in small and medium enterprises. Many of them have ideas around how they would have done things differently if they'd been the boss, for example, and might have lost their jobs in transitioning industries. Many of them would be good in the service industries and training of younger workers, and that can be done through small and medium enterprises. And so one of the things in the National Innovation and Science Agenda is to support equity investments in start-up businesses. So there'll be tax changes for angel investors. There'll be an income tax reduction for angel investors, deductions for angel investors. There'll be capital gains tax exemptions for angel investors in startups where they hold the asset for between 3 and 10 years. Not more than 10, because we want people to keep moving their money around as well as investing in small and medium enterprises. And we're establishing incubators and accelerators. We know that quite a lot of the state governments have done that too. South Australia has a smallish one here. The University of South Australia has one as well, an incubator which has been quite successful. And they've produced quite a few businesses out of their incubator, but we're going to encourage those in regional areas, because typically, if you go to Sydney, things like accelerators and incubators are a dime a dozen in terms of people talking about that. If you're in Albury, Wodonga, or if you're in Adelaide or in Launceston or wherever you might be, Alice Springs, you think that that's not going to work in your particular city, but in fact there's a lot of reasons why it could work. And I think older Australians are much more inclined these days to take risks, and so therefore we are, I think, well placed in South Australia, because we have, I think you said 570,000 workers aged over 50, I think you said. Yeah, and therefore we are well placed to take advantage of those people. And if you take it to the extreme in terms of aged care, it's another area where South Australia is actually the best place in Australia for aged care. And a lot of the research and development in aged care, which is a big business, is done in South Australia. So that's just another area where we could be actually doubling, trebling our investment and our return over time. So I think older South Australians should be seen as an economic advantage for our state rather than, you know, a disadvantage, and we need to work out what they want to do that we can take full advantage of and harness their experience.
Can I just add to that too? One of the initiatives of the Economic Development Board is in the area of productive or healthy ageing. We really think South Australia, following on from your comments, Minister Pyne, is really primed to be a global leader in the productive ageing industry. And so we're in the process of looking around, what does that mean? What do we bring together? But I think it is a real opportunity at that end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, one of the things that we're looking at here too is how we really can positively engage our early career researchers with our local companies. Research tends to be a little bit, I've done my research and who wants to commercialise my widget. We're trying to go the other way and say, if we get our early career researchers to go out to industries and say, what's your problem and how can I go back to my network and do that? And I think we're the only state that has a formal network of early career researchers. So I think trying to get them to go out and work with industry, and of course a lot of them might then get jobs, and will grow the growth at both ends of the spectrum in the innovative industries for healthy ageing and our early career highly intelligent researchers.
Don Manifold from EY. Thank you to the speakers for very enjoyable topics. Just a question perhaps to you, Michael, in the first instance about the impacting of the ageing population on the economy, and maybe also to the broader panel, you know, what things should we be thinking about with immigration, both from an innovation perspective and perhaps also an ageing population perspective?
I'll certainly on the population story. I mean, Australia's population is ageing like it is pretty much everywhere, and that is throwing up new challenges, but also new opportunities. I think because as populations age, their spending habits change, and the opportunities come through from that. And the areas that clearly benefit are health. And the associated sectors there. We also see older populations are the ones who hold most of the net wealth in Australia, so opportunities on the financial services side of things as well. But I suppose it highlights the more fundamental point, and you hear this from economists from time to time, that the growth equation really just involves the three Ps, population, participation and productivity, and it's how you pull the levers on those three things that will in the end determine how the growth trajectory proceeds. And one of the things you know about ageing populations, of course, is they tend to be less involved in the labour force. So certainly strategies to stretch out that part of the story are sort of things we've been talking about today. Can only help that longer run growth equation, and innovation clearly feeds into the productivity part of that story as well.
Can I add to that, Brendan? Obviously my speech was only 15 minutes or something, so I couldn't go through all the 24 measures in the National Innovation and Science Agenda, but one of those is an entrepreneur's visa. We are making it much easier for people from overseas who have an idea to move to Australia to expand that idea. It can't be just everybody who thinks that they've got an idea and they're going to have a start-up and they're going to move to Australia. They'll have to show that they have investment from a ESVCLP or a VCLP, one of the registered VCLPs or ESVCLPs here in Australia. If they have that tick off from one of them, then they will be able to access a 2-year visa as an entrepreneur. If their idea is taking off, if it's turning out as they expect, or if they've dumped that idea and started a new one, and that's working, then they'll be able to stay and have permanent residence. If not, then the terms of their visa won't be successful. So that's just another aspect of the National Innovation and Science Agenda, where we want to bring people who are with innovative entrepreneurial ideas and culture, because I'm a population enthusiast. I want more people in Australia. I've got 4 of my own children, but I think we should have as many Australians coming here as possible. 24 million we passed last week. South Australia needs a lot more people. If we have a lot more people, there'll be a lot more houses being built, a lot more people going to schools, and we'll be having more retail, so we want more people here. And we need the businesses, the industries that will bring them here. So I'm an unadulterated enthusiast for a higher population, and I would like to get the Commonwealth to give us back our extra points if you come to Adelaide, which Labor took away from us in the ride to government. Not that I want to be too political today, but that's a fact.
Run out of time, but a final question from Con.
Contragakis, KPMG. I'm just interested to have a further discussion on the nuclear debate. It's very topical this week, obviously. We've got a federal government review on low-level waste.
A federal government, Con, or a federal government?
A federal government.
It's a relief.
That's coming later, Minister.
Con is the manager of my children's football team at Paynham, so we know each other very well.
I'm just interested to get your perspective and view on whether we need to deal with that kind of waste first before we entertain anything else.
Well, I think that was my earlier point about being a responsible owner, is about, there is no fast start in the nuclear industry. Let's explode that myth today. It is highly regulated for a reason. Therefore, it's carefully considered. Being a responsible owner for our own generated waste, however small, however low level it is the very first start in us proving to the rest of the world, who we may encourage in any waste deal, whether that's part of it, the economics or not, is a good demonstration that we've matured, we've understand the regulations, we're competent, we're being responsible. So I think we've got to overcome that first before we have grand visions of nuclear energy power generation within the next 5 years. We have to explore the economics of whether we need nuclear within the energy mix right at this moment in time as well. Large quantities of oil and gas, LNG, wind, solar, what's the populist pool for another component for a nuclear energy to be added to the mix? And this is part of the consultation process. We've got to explore every one of these arguments to make sure that we are, getting into this for the right reasons.
Leanna, just a final panel comment.
Yeah, I'm on the advisory group for the Royal Commission, so I've been poring over the interim findings, which are now public. If you haven't seen them, worth looking at. I don't see a reason to wait for the local. I think it's important, obviously, what we do with our local waste. But the opportunity is there, certainly, as an economic proposition, to import waste and to store it safely. Perhaps some would say, as a globally responsible nation, that's something that we ought to be doing. And there are certainly key countries out there who are keen to have that happen very quickly. The evidence suggests it's not time to build nuclear energy per se as a power source, just not economical. But having said that too, there's a lot of consultation needed still to get social acceptance, which is absolutely crucial. So I think that the Commission is a fantastic process, very well done. Kevin's tremendous leading that, and will examine and has examined a whole lot of aspects of it. I think we'll come up with a very strong recommendation with I hope some fairly good timeframes shortly for how we can grow that opportunity, provided we get the social acceptance.
Thank you very much, panel. And if I just could ask Contragakis and Chairman of Partners of KPMG South Australia just to come up and give the vote of thanks.